Say what?
I have a number for you to copy.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us on the 26th episode of Pilots Say What, where we hear what pilots have to say. Today we have Travis with us. If you've watched before or you've listened before, this is Zachary. I am your host, and we're going to get into it here pretty quickly. We'll go over a few things, of course, getting to know Travis a little bit. Kind of want to talk a little bit about the obstacles that go into starting your flight training. Some people maybe think that flight training is a kind of a far off thing to reach for.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come to understand that that's not the case. And so I want to highlight that a little bit. Before we get into any of those things,
Yeah.
I'll ask you to introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Okay. My name's Travis.
Mhm.
I'm a CFI here at Thrust. I'm a career changer. So
Awesome.
I used to do music ed.
Mm-hmm.
For about 6 years here in Texas. Grew up in Utah.
Okay.
So there's a couple CFIs here that did their training in Utah actually. So
Were you did you go to the ZTA program?
yeah, I took a discovery flight and a 150 and discovery flight, and one of my friends clapped out Cherokees.
Oh, really?
Out of 52 Foxtrot. I met him through jujitsu, and he was
Okay.
like, "Oh, you thinking about being a pilot? Like my dad has a plane. I'm a CFI." And I was like, "Okay, let's go do it."
Yeah.
And then he's the one who actually told me, he's like, "Well, if you want to get done quick, I went to Thrust for my CFI Academy back when they used to do the CFI Academy a la
Yeah.
carte." And
Right.
he was like, "I thought it was great."
Yeah.
Like,
Before that, did you have, because you said that y'all's conversation went something like, oh, you're interested.
hmm
Well, when did you become interested?
I'd say January of 2023. That was like my last semester of teaching private lessons
Mm.
in music.
And you had already decided that before you
And
knew
I was
you
just like, do I go into like sales? Do I go into I was just like, I want to, switch it up.
makes
But I
sense.
wanted something that was a little more just cool, honestly.
Yeah.
Cuz like music ed was fun, but it wasn't cool and I couldn't like progress and
Mm.
unless I wanted to be a band director, and like
You didn't want to
I
do
don't
that.
want to be a band director. But so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to kind of do this. My grandpa flew charter in
Yeah.
Montana. So I was like, oh, it's a little bit in my blood. And then I just kind of asked around, and yeah, I took those discovery flights and I actually got like really sick. And
Mm.
so that was the first
Like
obstacle for
nauseous.
me. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
air sick.
Yeah.
The first obstacle for me is flying right for me if I just get sick. Each discovery flight's a couple $100 at least.
Yeah.
And so to take it back to your first question, like barriers to flight training, that was my first one,
Oh,
which was
really?
just like, yo, this didn't feel good.
Yeah, that makes me curious then. Like, is it that you had that much interest in flying, or did you really like it? You just hated that you got sick.
Well, yeah, it's like I enjoyed it until I got sick, but like the idea of flying was still really cool to me.
Yeah. Did you at that point you're like, just maybe I'll get used to it.
Yeah, I was like, I'm gonna have to make a leap. And so that's when I took the second discovery flight. And he was like,
Mhm.
well, if you want to get done fast, and that was something that I was interested in because I was like, I have bills, I have rent,
Mhm.
and I was like, savings, how much am I gonna spend? How much am I gonna go loan for? But I was like, if I can do it fast and I can get over this, like sickness, I was like, you know what? If I stay sick, I'll get a refund or something.
Yeah, you'll
Like
just figure it out from there.
I was just like, whatever.
You're just gonna go for it. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool, man. Actually, has it gotten easier?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I
I
just
mean, like as a private, like the first time, my instructor was like, let's do steep turns. And I'm like, okay.
you're like I'm gonna have a hard
And
time
and
here.
all of a sudden, like it felt like we were only 45 degrees, but it felt like we were 90.
Mm,
And she did one. She's like, you want to try? I'm like, no, I just want to go back because
yeah,
I just started feeling sick.
yeah.
But after about a week, it was fine.
Man, I mean, I don't know how that sounds. Maybe it's just me, but that sounds really like maybe for lack of a better word, really brave to sit
Yeah,
there and think like I can't go up without getting sick, but I'm gonna go into flight training.
yeah. And I mean, the only time I ever like got sick,
Hmm.
was my first discovery flight, and it was in a 150.
Yeah.
So I was
It's-
with a guy that was like 6'6", and he was in there like,
yeah.
and we were getting bumped around.
Okay.
It was
Y'all
in
were
May,
copy
and then my spin flight, I lost it after
naturally.
6 spins. So, but other than that, like I don't know, it wasn't too bad. Like here
Hmm.
when I was doing it, it just like I'd get out and for a couple hours the
A little
earth
woozy.
wouldn't feel. I mean, I guess you could say I was a little brave, but it was a little reckless on my part, I think, initially when I was like, I got sick both times I did my discovery
And
flights.
that's what I mean specifically.
Yeah, and I was
Like I'm
just
like,
like,
wow, you're just gonna go for it anyways.
just sign up for ZTA.
Hey
Yep.
man, I think I think that's a great testament to if there's a will, there's a way,
Yeah.
and it'll work its way out. I mean, maybe you learn things that help you, maybe things to eat better, things like that. Probably that kind
I
of
did
help
I did like the ginger chews and the don't eat greasy foods, but to me it was just exposure.
exposure.
Like even because I had to do my second spin flight because I did 6 and he's like, and I lost it and he was like, you got to come back. It's like, I can't give you the endorsement yet. And I was like,
Yeah,
seriously. But when I came back, like even the next week, not too
nothing.
bad. Like it
Gotcha.
was a little uncomfortable, but I was nowhere near. So,
That's really cool. I was kind of worried about that. My first time going up, I went up during like the eclipse.
hmm
But I was like, man, I'm a nauseous kind of person. Like I'll get car sick in the back of a seat, back
yeah,
of a car,
yeah.
especially like something with a small window, like a Camaro or something. I'm
hmm
like, oh, I used to hate getting car sick. But I went up there and I was a little woozy or whatever, but I was fine.
Yeah,
And I felt like, oh, if I did that a couple times, I'd be good. And then when we flew to Conroe, I was like, it's nothing.
nothing.
Yeah, and I was in the
Yeah.
back seat still,
hmm
which was like the more I feel like.
It's the worst part of it.
Yeah, that's the I did not enjoy it that much, but I would like to be in the front.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I can imagine. That's why I say it's brave. I would be like, man, if I know that feeling, I would be like
It's
afraid. So
it you lose
mm,
interest in basically everything when you
yeah,
get that feeling. It's like,
absolutely. Check out for real
yeah.
quickly. Anyhow, well, I'm glad to know that you started off feeling kind of sick and now you don't, so that's kind
No,
of
feel
good.
great.
um, so your interest started though. You had already kind of decided to that you want to do something different, and you're not sure what it
hmm
was. You're in. Did you say Taekwondo? What'd you say?
Jujitsu.
Jiu-jitsu, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
How long after that did you say it took for you to kind of make the decision that I'm gonna go figure out thrust flight?
3 weeks.
3 weeks?
Because he said thrust flight, and then of course, I get on the internet and I look up, reviews of all the big box flight schools and
Yeah.
like Part 61 versus Part 141, and I was like, well, you know, some people are gonna have bad things to say either way,
Mhm.
so it's just like, what's the style that I want,
Mhm.
and thrust kind of just fit.
Did you come visit the school before you finally decided?
Yeah, I did. I
Yeah.
talked to Nathan for like an hour.
Oh yeah, and he can do that.
hmm
So,
Yeah.
that being said, did you take the tour and everything? Was there an initial thought?
Yeah, there was a tour. I forget her name, but she gave me the tour, and I just, a big convincing thing for me was like the FSP, the infrastructure. I could tell there
Yes.
was like resources devoted to that,
Mhm.
and obviously the planes, the quality of the planes,
Yeah, I mean, they're
and
nice and shiny when you go out there. Even if you don't know anything about a plane, you can see that, hey, this looks like a
it's
new
like I'm
car.
not gonna, yeah, like I'm gonna be okay in this thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And
So
have AC. And a lot of people don't know that that's actually not common.
yeah,
So
yeah.
a lot of people didn't know that. Well, uh, and last question about this, I guess, but I kind of want to understand maybe where you're at in that part of your life where you
hmm
make that career change, because I don't think people make career changes. Well, some people do out of boredom too. I guess I'm just curious, like, were you living at home? Was it kind of a tough, risky thing, or was it like I've saved up some money?
Well, yeah. So I had some money saved up,
Mm-hmm.
and but I kind of saw my trajectory as like in my other careers, like, am I gonna be able to be a single income earner with
Mm-hmm.
this? And it's like I'm basically landlocked in Texas to do music ed at the level that I was doing it.
Exactly.
Um, and I was getting a little bored, but yeah, I was just like, I can't be too much more ambitious in this field.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I started the YouTube, was like, oh, maybe I can.
Do something here.
But it was, I made 10 videos in like a year.
Yeah. I mean, no, it can be a difficult thing.
And I was like, I don't really know how to monitor. I thought of like, we tried to make a practice pad. So like for drums, you don't want it to be too loud. So you make it out of like gum rubber. And I
Mhm.
was like, let's make an epoxy resin practice pad. And it just didn't work. Threw a bunch of money at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was part of like the single income earner thing. It was
Mhm.
the lifestyle. It was just doing something cool.
Yeah.
I was almost going to be a air traffic controller in my early 20s.
Yeah.
I really looked into it a
Mm.
lot, and
Yeah.
I've flown with guys that work also as controllers, like
Yeah.
at Traycon, and it's pretty cool.
That makes sense. Well, then, I guess the last thing is, was there anything that made you hesitant other than being sick? I mean, it
Um,
seemed like you pulled the trigger pretty quickly.
yeah.
So
Well, and I knew because when I like decided, the hiring market was hot, and so I was like,
mm,
and I think a lot of people, were pretty reckless about that. But I was like, well, it's going to take X amount of time, a range of time. Recession could happen. Anything
right.
can happen.
So it might be hot now, but by the time you finish, it may not
So I
be.
kind of, yeah, I kind of just made sure like, okay, well, how many months of savings do I have? Am I going to be able to service this loan um, for the rest of it that I couldn't pay for out of savings?
Mm-hmm.
I moved to reduce my rent with roommates because I was living alone
Mm,
in Euless, and I was like driving 45 minutes here, and I was like,
yeah.
you know what, and I moved in with one of my lifting friends in Allen
Mm-hmm.
for a lot cheaper.
That's
But
cool.
I guess for me, yeah, it was just I can stay. I was like, I can stay afloat. I like did all the math,
Yeah,
and like even if it takes me like 12, 14 months
you can figure it out.
to do training and like not have an income, like I'll be able to make it. And then you know, one of the leaps was like, am I going to get hired as a CFI, and where
At
am I going to
least.
get hired?
Yeah.
But it's like if I could get X amount, I can service my loan, I can live.
Yeah, you can make it happen. Yeah.
So it was a bit of an investment and a leap there too, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like there's a little bit of money insecurity just doing the training.
Yeah.
Um, but then it was like it'll pay off. Like 10 years from now.
I guess even for myself, I'm thinking, I don't know about going to a university, right? Because
Yeah,
I'm like, wow, what a big. They tell you that you go to your university to get a job, when really it's higher education. It doesn't. Most of you're lucky if the university does a good job at preparing you for your
yeah,
career, and even then, it's a lot of proactive actions on your part that you may or may not know to take in the first place.
yep,
So what I'm getting at is, I had that insecurity about going to a university and things like that. It doesn't seem like that's even as it seems. I don't want to be speaking against anything, but doesn't that seem a little scarier than even this?
Oh yeah, like if you go to an out of state school, you're paying more.
Mhm.
It's way more time investment,
Mhm.
and yeah, it's like you might not even have a skill. Like I
Yeah.
got a psychology degree, so you can imagine, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
was it that's tough to use?
well, yeah, unless you want to get your master's, and then I decided, nah, maybe I don't want to
Yeah,
get
maybe
my
I don't.
master's.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it is a lot of money, but when you compare it to time investment and money of higher education,
Mhm.
I mean, unless you go STEM,
And the
um,
reason I asked that though is because like I think a lot of people think, how do pilots become pilots? So they probably have a military background, or maybe they grew up doing this or something like that. Because that's a crazy niche skill or something. Or how do you even attain that skill? And
yeah,
I guess I just like to think that like if you can fathom going to a university, I'm sure you can fathom doing this as long as you're okay with being in a plane.
yeah,
So I guess that's news to me when I started working here.
hmm,
Yeah, I was just telling Hunter the earlier. I was like, "Hey, man, I mean, if for some reason this isn't working out, I'm just gonna hop into flight school. It seems like a good time." But I'm that way too. I like to move around. I don't really.
hmm,
I think I got my first big boy job, corporate job or something when I was like 20,
hmm,
and of course that was without a degree. But so who knows how I was gonna like that in the long run, regardless. But I just remember just not enjoying being at the desk 8 hours a day,
yeah,
and thinking like, I'd rather do anything. And I went and worked at a restaurant. I quit and I worked at a sushi restaurant because I was like, I'm talking to
mm,
people. I'd rather do that.
yeah.
Of course, that gets old too. So you know, now I'm talking to
Now
people.
here you are, yeah,
Yeah, or whatever. So yes, it's exciting. It sounds cool. Well, thanks for sharing
yeah,
some of that because it's kind of personal, but that's cool to hear that people are
hmm.
changing jobs. We have a lot of people who shift careers here. Are any of the people that you're like studying with or working with? Like, is there any cool stories you've heard from any of the people you're working with?
Actually, one of the students that I flew with, he was never my primary, but he was like a professional bowler.
Professional bowler.
Yeah,
That's cool. Not
yeah,
gonna
and
lie.
he was just like, yeah, I have my 300 ring and blah blah blah. And he said he just got tired of it because he did it as a kid for so long, and his dad was like, "You are a bowler," and then eventually he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna do this." And
Be
there's
fine
one
with it.
guy I've heard about him he's in the CFI Academy.
Yeah.
He's like a like cage fighter or something
What the heck,
from like
man?
South America. Yeah, I have no idea,
Dude.
but I haven't met him. Um,
And I'm not just trying to. I don't want to just highlight how cool and diverse thrust flight is. That's not even my goal here. I was just curious, but I feel like in the industry in general, I mean, there's a lot
yeah,
of flight schools, right? People can look at
hmm,
all of them. Um, but it seems like a lot of people change careers. I think one of our most recent guests used to be a police dispatcher. Seems like there's a lot of reasons to come over here, and it seems like most people it comes down to just simply awareness.
hmm,
They're like, oh, I didn't know that would be the way it looked until people looked into it, and then they're like, oh, I can do that. I
yeah,
can. probably get into a career within 2 years and then start servicing my loan or whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, well, so you're a CFI now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a CFI, how long have you been in your CFI role?
February, March.
Oh yeah.
I got hired February, and then I did my CFII in March, and then that's when I got students.
Okay. And then you have so you have a handful of months under your belt at this point, at least.
Yeah.
Those first few months are. I hear that that's just as difficult, if not more difficult, than most of your ratings, right?
Yeah, you learn a lot.
Yeah.
You learn a good amount.
Yeah. Did you think that by the time you got into being a CFI that it wouldn't feel like there's still a lot to learn?
Yeah, I mean, I was a little surprised with how low hours I was compared to like some other people that go Part 61
Mm-hmm.
to end up as CFIs.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I have to be the one in charge, and I have to make sure that they don't do anything dumb. I don't do anything dumb. There's things that I deferred to my instructor as a
Right.
student, and now I can't do, like, I can defer to like my higher ups, but only
Yeah.
on the ground. Like in the plane, it's like, what am I
You're the
gonna?
one who gets deferred to at this point, right?
Yeah,
Like the
yeah.
yeah.
To be assertive enough to say like, hey, go around, even like that.
Yeah,
Good to
absolutely.
know that.
Um, I've heard people say that maybe it's the res- like the level or the grandness of the responsibility doesn't really hit you until you're there.
Mm,
Maybe you kind of get in the cockpit and you're like, oh wait a second, like they're relying on me now,
yeah.
and I think you kind of start to realize the teamwork that was always there when you were a student.
Hmm.
Like, oh, the CFI had my back in the way that I'm thinking now. It's like I'm looking out for all the mistakes they could make.
Yeah.
So, anyhow, you got a couple of months, a handful of months under your belt. How's that going? Like, are you enjoying teaching?
Yeah.
Is that something that you knew was a part of the system? Oh, you did. You said you took that into account.
Yeah. So I knew like there's a culture like a lot of people don't want to be CFIs, but
Right.
it's like quote unquote the best way to build time
Mm-hmm.
quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, I mean, I taught music ed for 6 years, and I enjoy it. It's kind of like a little puzzle. Everyone's a little puzzle.
Yeah.
Not to
Everyone.
depersonalize everybody, but
I get it.
and so I don't mind it at all. I think it's pretty interesting. Like I couldn't do other time building jobs probably that were more monotonous. Like a lot
Mm.
of people always, when I was a student, everyone's like, "Oh, you got to get a pipeline connection, or
Yeah.
fly pipeline VFR."
You just get to look at the pipelines and check them.
Yeah, it's like these really old planes with cameras, and they
Mm.
fly the pipelines, and
Yeah.
sometimes they're around here, at low level. And I was just like, I would just get so.
You would get bored, no?
And there is a lot of skills you can build doing that. Like you have to plan your route, and you're the only one responsible, and you're kind of on your own. But yeah, I think I definitely wouldn't be as good of a pilot if I hadn't given all these hours of dual given.
That makes sense. They say that you really don't know something until you can teach it.
Yeah,
Right? I hear that. I don't know if that's the way the statement goes or whatever,
yeah,
but you like you said you were kind of already teaching music for what, like 6 years you said.
hmm
Um and now going into this, do you think that a lot of those skills transferred over? What's the comparison like?
I think so because like there's always there's common mistakes in music and in flying,
Mhm.
and if you can be aware and guard, usually use the term like guard against common mistakes.
Mhm.
So there's common mistakes for everybody, but then you learn about a particular person, and like they might have a little fear that inhibits them, and then
Mm.
they're likely to make this mistake. So then you can be like guard against this mistake. I
Mhm.
think a lot of it has transferred, but in music, it's not as cut and dry. But
Mhm.
like with flying, it's like these are the standards.
Yeah.
Like there's more artistry in the music, but some people who take the flying a little more like artistically
Mhm.
are usually better. I
Mm.
don't know if that makes
I know.
sense,
I
but
do think
if they have some sort of style to what they do,
yeah,
or everyone's got their like pilot voice or whatever.
exactly.
It's along the lines of that, but it's like how they fly the plane.
I,
Um,
I would imagine it as like maybe a creative approach or the way they solve problems. Do you
yeah,
think that's sort of what it is that kind of comes through as like an artistic flyer or something?
yeah, or like some students are very like I have to do it like very rigid, and then other
Mm.
students are like I'm gonna do it the right way, but why not me? Like why can't I just make it a more enjoyable flight?
Yeah, why can't I do this at this point as long as I achieve the what's the word, the standard,
Yeah.
right? Do you what do you think? What is that? Like, what is that? Is that a skill? Is that a behavior? I'm trying to figure
It's
out.
mindset.
It's a mindset.
Well, because and like in music, a lot of people will play a piece perfectly,
Hmm.
but they're like scared of the instrument, or they're just they play it well because they're scared of doing something wrong. So they're like avoiding a negative.
Mm,
And then there's pilots like that too. A lot of us on our check rides, we just don't want to fail the maneuver. We just want to avoid the negative. But some people get in this way where they want to not avoid a negative but achieve a positive,
right.
and like go beyond just not screwing up or being sat,
Mm,
as we say.
being sat.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
satisfactory.
Oh,
So like if
okay.
you fail like a stage check, sometimes in the notes say like stage one unsat,
Yeah.
or if you pass, it'll be like stage one sat.
Yeah.
Um,
And so some people you think they're able to maybe do what would be considered more than sat
yeah,
if they're less fearful.
yeah. If they're not letting the plane fly them, if they,
Mm,
you know, push themselves, because your instructor can push you,
yeah.
but not every instructor is going to push you the same way or to the same degree.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's like if you can just make it more enjoyable,
Yeah.
usually you'll be a better pilot too.
What kind of ways do you see those people excel? If you don't mind me asking, is there some noticeable differences in the way their mindset is benefiting them?
They want to get done sooner usually.
Mm-hmm.
They're more motivated.
Mm-hmm.
So like they're willing to fly more. They're
Mm,
always, come prepared. I don't really have to, you know, egg them on. I'm like, "Okay, what did we talk about last time?
yeah.
It's happening again." Like if I tell them, "Hey, you didn't know your approach speed like and you're in CFI Academy, like what are you doing?"
Yeah.
And next time they'll come back and they'll be like, "Yes, 66 plus or minus 5,
Yeah.
Um there'll be kind of that to them. And they won't say it out of like, I
Yeah.
got
Like
my
out of
speeds
just answering
today."
the yeah.
It's like
Huh.
they get it and they see the value of it. But I
Mm,
would say a lot of times they are more efficient in the plane. Their
mm,
hours are more efficient, and they're willing to fly more.
mm.
So I think
It
if that
almost
answers your
I
question,
think it does. I
yeah,
appreciate that. Thank you. I was
yeah.
just kind of looking for maybe like a cross reference of behaviors. Like what other behaviors they
Oh,
reference?
okay,
You kind of said that for me.
yeah,
So that's good. Because it makes me think. Oh, people who are kind of a go getter, a little more ambitious there, and maybe have a vision for what they want.
yep.
Tend to be making those sorts of decisions rather than people who are just trying to
I feel
meet a
like,
certain standard. So I know there's some things. There's like common maneuvers within each rating,
yeah.
right? And there's lots of different techniques and things to be able to do. Is there anything that you maybe tend to enjoy teaching the most because it turns on more light bulbs for people, or is there something that you see commonly people struggle with that you like to
Mm.
focus on?
Yeah, you can sometimes make your own maneuvers
Mm-hmm.
to help if they have an area of lacking. Like so, for instrument, you have to descend at 90 knots at the specific rate,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes if you don't descend enough,
Mm-hmm.
you have to get down. But if you get down, you get fast. And
Mm,
so there's this idea of total energy management,
mm,
and so sometimes I'll just like make up a little like, okay, we're gonna stay at this altitude, then we're gonna climb up, and then we're gonna stay at the other altitude, and the whole time you have to be at this airspeed.
yes.
So it's like they have to adjust the throttle to manage total energy so the airspeed is always the same. Because usually when you climb, you're slower. When you
Hmm.
level off, you're faster. Um,
It seems to be a repeating from the conversations I've had, like a repeating, like you're saying, technique to be
yeah,
able to have to use for many maneuvers.
yeah, and especially like on final for landing,
Yeah.
like you have to manage energy,
Mm-hmm.
and you have two ways of expressing energy, which is the PHAC talks about altitude is potential, and then airspeed is kinetic energy,
Mm-hmm.
and so um, being able to manage that, and if you mismanage, knowing how to correct it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
That
Is there anything about those the differences in energy or something around what you're talking about, anyways? Is there anything there that people typically misunderstand,
um, I mean,
or maybe you would want
early
to highlight?
on, early
Yeah.
on is pretty common when you're below best glide,
Mm-hmm.
like VG on final. When you're slow airspeed,
Mm-hmm.
um, typically we use pitch to change altitude at a higher airspeed, and
Okay.
power to change our airspeed,
Right.
like how fast we're going.
Actually. Yeah.
But we have this thing called the region of reverse command,
Mm-hmm.
or more colloquially, like the backside of the power curve,
Mm-hmm.
where your throttle and your pitch
Mm-hmm.
change responsibilities somewhat.
Mm.
So like if
So
you're
is there
getting
like inversely related? Is that what you're saying? Kind of.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's and I always pull up the lift drag graph. I know that's a little technical,
No, I like
but
that.
I show them. I was like, see, behind this LD Max, behind Best Glide, the drag profile is different.
Hmm.
So like when people get slow coming into land, I'm like, hey, your airspeed's slowing down. They'll touch the throttle instead of push the nose down. But
Yeah.
if they push the nose down and they're on the right glide path, they're gonna go below the glide path. So
Mm,
it's this management of like, if I do this, how's the plane gonna respond in 5 to 10 seconds? Do I
yeah.
just need to do that, or do I need to, as we say, stay ahead of the plane
Hmm.
and like also prevent a mistake from happening
Yeah.
by
It's
making an
it.
adjustment?
It's sort of like, and that's why I kind of like the idea of when I hear people talking about how to combine the use of like, I don't know all the terminology, but how they're using yoke and how they're determining what to do with the rudders and
Hmm.
and how to gain speed or change altitude. Like it kind of reminds me of the camera because there's
The aperture triangle.
exactly the aperture and
It's
exposure triangle
oh
exactly.
man, that is so true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
There's
because
there's a relation between not just two variables like you might get in some sports or something, offense, defense, or whatever, but you
yeah,
have three variables there, and the relationship can get complicated based on one change to one of the variables.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I showed some of my lifting friends how to use cameras, and sometimes like I can just crank up the ISO and shoot at f4, and I'm like, yeah, but it's gonna be noisy. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm
It's
like, ah.
exactly, and
But yeah,
then
it's very much like the exposure triangle that
yeah,
like when you change one variable, like yeah, I want to get a thinner depth of field, but then all of a sudden more light and I'm overexposing. And
yeah,
it's
but
like,
then and
ugh.
then and then you change this, but then you're gonna get to exactly.
So yeah, you have to kind of, if you want to manipulate the image or whatever, you have to manipulate all three.
Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
and so when I hear you talking about how, oh, okay, well, depends on where you're at, what this may do,
Yeah.
And so I guess um if we're continuing the analogy a little bit, if you know where you're at and you know what you want to achieve,
Hmm.
then you can really put the different variables a little bit more into perspective.
Yeah.
So like you're saying thinking 10 seconds ahead,
Hmm.
you can think a little bit more about how, oh, I'm already at this altitude and at this speed and at this angle, and
Yep.
I really want to be at this. I don't. You shouldn't think about how to change. You should just think about how what's going to put you there. Kind of.
Yeah.
I guess if that makes sense. So
Yep.
I'm gonna think about that a little more. Obviously, I don't know how to
No,
fly,
that
but
makes sense.
I got like a conceptual understanding. I guess.
I actually, yeah, I thought of that like I think maybe a week or two ago.
Yeah.
It was like it's like, because when people drive a car, there's like speed that goes like linearly and then turning that goes linearly.
Yes.
But flying is like there's a third dimension.
Exactly, and that it took me a second to understand that. I actually didn't know, and I want to circle back to a moment ago in a bit because they don't know that you know anything about cameras.
Oh yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit about your background, but um, yeah, in a car, like you said, it's very linear. I didn't know that in a plane that the rudders were also controlling.
The nose.
Yeah, I didn't understand what it did, and I didn't know. It's an easy thought to have that. Oh, you just turn the yoke, and your
Mhm.
plane's gonna turn. Well,
Yep.
no, it's like there's a lot of variables, and you're
Mhm.
using all your limbs,
Yeah.
so it's a lot more
That's
different.
cool.
Um, briefly, why do you know much about cameras?
Oh, I just thought they were cool. So I used to power lift, and everyone like started getting nice cameras and just posting reels and stories.
Yeah.
But I also had like a really small YouTube channel for a while.
Hmm.
I still have it, but I just haven't posted in a year
Exactly.
or whatever. Of me drumming, and so I kind of had, I almost bought like an aperture, like 300 or whatever
Yeah.
color RGB,
That's so
but
nice. I won't
yeah,
get too much into the nerd talk. I can go all day on the cameras, but
yeah, yeah.
that's
Um, but yeah, I remember when I first got the camera, it like I couldn't use it right.
yeah,
So yeah, I just nerded out about the camera stuff in general,
it's kind of fun to nerd
but
out
it
about
was
it.
also like I was helping people with lifting, like figure out how to actually use their cameras.
How to
Like
film, yeah.
they would buy like Micro Four Thirds, kit lenses, and I'm like, no, no,
Be in a
no.
dark gym, like
It's
yeah.
like you need a prime lens.
It's
Manual focus is fine. You're not moving.
you had them in there spending a lot of money on these cameras and lenses. Maybe not, but
Yeah, yeah. There was always that question of like, how much did you spend? I'm like, you don't have to spend like that much.
Mhm.
Just
Yeah, no, I hear what
focus.
you're saying. Well, I just wanted to highlight that you've had a couple different passions. So right now, if I wanted to recap it, I could say that you enjoy music, lifting, camera, and
flying.
and flying now.
Yeah.
But the difference is out of all those things, flying is going to probably be the most likely to be monetizable
Oh
and
yeah.
career building,
Here I am.
right? And
Yeah.
here you are, yeah. And I mean, you're already working
Hmm.
in a flying career, in an aviation career, so that's really
Yeah.
cool. With that being said, you're here, you're a CFI, you're building your hours. I mean, that's part of what everyone does. Do you imagine yourself teaching for a certain amount of time? Do you imagine yourself trying to fly for a certain airline in a certain city, anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, I always got this question when I was a student, like, "What's your dream?" And I was like, I'm not like I always thought it would be kind of cool to fly smaller jets,
Yeah,
corporate, but that world seems even now it seems a lot less like out there and unknown. But
yeah.
even now it seems like a little bit like that. So
Hmm.
I don't know if I'll instruct all the way to 1500 or whatever.
Hmm.
But some people like I might not have a choice.
Right.
Like the industry might be in such a way
Yeah.
that stays like that the best way to keep going is just being a flight instructor.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like it here. The only reason that I would probably change is if I got to like the 135 minimums, which
Hmm.
is 1200 hours,
Hmm.
or if I found some opportunity flying like a cooler plane.
Right.
Like, because a lot of times you don't really get paid a ton more to fly these other types of time building jobs,
Hmm.
but the planes are cooler or the hours are a little more valuable that you get.
The diversity and the experience
Yeah.
itself. That makes sense. I mean, you're saying you're not super eager to get out of here or anything like that, but
Yeah.
but you're gonna keep your eyes on the horizon for different opportunities, especially
Yeah.
before getting to an airline, if anything.
Hmm.
Is that an interest of yours though to go to the airlines?
I think so.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it seems like that's like that's the majority
yeah.
of the of the field in the industry, but
Yeah.
you're keeping your eyes open for
I
it.
think it would be a good experience to not go straight from CFI to airlines to do something in between.
I can imagine that. I think people who come into a job with a little bit more of a diverse experience than the other people around them tend to maybe maneuver a little better
Yeah.
or even work better with people. That's I guess that's been my experience so far.
And I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I joined a flight club, um,
Yeah.
and just even flying different planes,
Yeah.
like because I have so much time in the Archer, and I have a
Yeah.
little bit of time in the Cessna,
Yeah.
but even like a Cherokee or a Warrior or like smaller, different planes, different manufacturers,
Yeah.
it's just like I became a better instructor and a better pilot after 5 to 10 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. This will be my last time adding on to the analogy before we wrap up. But I remember getting on gigs where I had to use a different camera than I'm used to. Or maybe when so my first camera was like, a Canon T5i Rebel or whatever, but
Rebel.
the autofocus was actually surprisingly really good on those,
Hmm.
in my opinion. And then I switched to like one of the first Sony mirrorless cameras, and the autofocus was not usable. I mean, it just
Yeah.
wasn't. I thought something was wrong with my camera,
Hmm.
and I learned a lot about using the different camera and its different ability and its different manufacturer. Right,
Yeah.
so I learned a lot about how to operate that camera differently, and it taught me a lot about videos and photos
Hmm.
in ways that I kind of wouldn't have just from touching a different machine.
Yeah.
Again, that'll be like my last analogy before we wrap it up.
No, it makes sense.
I think we're getting to a good place here.
Yeah.
That being said, I appreciate you for joining us, Travis.
Yep.
This is the 26th episode, so we're kind of getting in there. We are stacking up some of these questions that we're getting in our comment section, and I'm gonna be rolling those out
AMA.
over. Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna be rolling those questions out over some of the future episodes.
Okay.
So if anyone has any questions, either whether it be for Travis or something you heard and it makes you think about something you want to know about, then please leave a question in the comment section if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on streaming platforms, those follows, those likes, those ratings really help us out. Otherwise, like, comment, and subscribe. You know how it goes. We'll see you guys next week on the next episode of Pilots Say What, where we hear what pilots have to say.